inviting me here. It's great being here. I'm from Ireland, which is a very strange relationship between politics and religion. To put it in perspective, in the 1970s, when the IRA was at the height of its campaign of terrorism, they used to use condoms as part of the timing mechanism in bombs, and some of the IRA members were opposed to using condoms on moral grounds. I'm going to suggest today, in terms of blasphemy laws, a couple of things. One, I'm going to argue that, first of all, that blasphemy laws are central to the campaign for secularism. I'm going to argue that they are both, they're simultaneously silly in the context of Western democracy and dangerous in the context of Islamic states. And that there is an overlap between both of those in terms of the Islamic ideas of blasphemy and apostasy influencing life in Western democracies, and the Western democracies' ideas of freedom of expression influencing Islamic states, both in terms of campaigns to support individuals in Islamic states who are suffering under Islamic blasphemy laws, and also in terms of the ongoing battle at the United Nations between the Western democracies and the Islamic states about blasphemy and defamation of religion. And finally, I'm going to say a little something about our shame in Ireland at being the only Western democracy to pass a new blasphemy law in the 21st century, reversing decades of progress in the Western side of the world. As I said, the context of the campaign against blasphemy laws is that it is absolutely central to the campaign for secularism. And secularism is a force for good for the same reason that religion is a source for bad, in that secularism protects our laws from being corrupted by the immoralities of religion, and particularly protects our laws from being corrupted by the bigotry and misogyny and homophobia of the Abrahamic religions, all of which worship the same God, one of the most malevolent creatures ever invented by humans, a God who in its original iteration in the Old Testament, his core message is to tell one tribe that if they obey his rules, that he will help them to kill other people and steal their land, and that if they don't obey his rules, that he will make them eat their own children. Now, that's hardly the basis of an ethical universal code for humanity. That God was then refined in various iterations by Paul, who gave us Christianity and the New Testament, by Muhammad, who gave us Islam and the Quran, and more recently by Joseph Smith, who gave us Mormonism and magic underpants. So the second thing that those religions have in common, as well as following a God that once drowned everybody on the planet apart from one family because he was upset with himself, is that they believe that they and only they are right. And they base that on various books, depending on which version of the God that they follow, that people have written thousands of years ago. And so when they get new information about reality, they're unable to take it on board. They have to crowbar it into being consistent with whatever somebody wrote 2,000 years ago or 1,400 years ago. And so, unlike atheists, they're not able to say, as we are, that if you give us new information, we'll change our mind, that we're happy to say about any assertion that we make, that we may be mistaken, and we're not going to fall back on claims of divine revelation, or we're not going to fall back on blasphemy laws to protect the knowledge that we have at the moment. In terms of the blasphemy laws being both silly and dangerous at the same time, I'll start with the Western democracies, where they are really silly, they're anachronistic, they're not really relevant to most people, other than in a sort of humorous context. If you go back historically, there is a dangerous development which was touched on in the last presentation, which is that in medieval times, blasphemy was about protecting the community from things that individuals did that angered gods, and it was about protecting the community from the wrath of the gods. Then, during the Enlightenment, the rights of the individual took over, and people recognised that individual rights to freedom of expression and conscience were more important than subjective opinions about deities. But we are now, unfortunately, regressing back to a situation where people are redefining blasphemy to protect communities. Except this time, it's not protecting communities from the wrath of God, it's protecting communities from being offended or being outraged by other people saying things that they disagree with. And instead of trying to get people to react proportionately when people say things that disagree with their fundamental beliefs, blasphemy laws encourage people to be outraged and offended because it creates an incentive to express that outrage and that offence. Most recently, that's been expressed in the Irish blasphemy law, the wording of which is that blasphemy has been defined as anything that's grossly abusive or insulting in relation to matters held sacred by any religion, thus causing outrage among a substantial proportion of adherents of that religion. Now, there's a load of problems with that, which I'll go into later on. But, for the moment, the principle that's significant is that it is a new blasphemy law introduced in the 21st century by a pluralist Western democracy. Despite that, it is fair to say that in Western democracies that blasphemy laws in recent decades have been, more or less confined to satire and humour. Things like the Life of Brian, which was banned. More recently, the attempts to take blasphemy charges against Jerry Springer, the opera. That's in terms of just purely internal Western democracies, and blasphemy against Christianity, say, that tends to be the area in which it's most prevalent today. But the difficulty, even though those laws aren't often enforced, is that just having them on the books, you never know when they're going to be enforced. You never know when somebody somewhere is going to decide that their conscience is dictating to them that they have to enforce some theological law or other. It most recently happened back in the 70s with the gay news case in America. Fortunately, that helped to lead to, or in Britain, fortunately that helped to lead to the repeal, ultimately, of the British blasphemy law. But it is still a dangerous thing just to have them there. Now, in Islamic states, it's far more dangerous. It's just such a different reality, and unless we think of it in terms of, unless we be tempted to think of it in terms of sort of hypothetical situations. I mean, later on, most of us will be here, I hope, to listen to Taslim Nasrin, who has been forced into exile and has had several death threats against her on the basis of blasphemy for her poetry and her autobiographies and her novels. And it's, I think we should be inspired by her presence here today as somebody who is standing up to that type of intimidation. There are a couple of other cases that I would like to see people here be aware of and campaign on. There's a case of an Indonesian civil servant called Alexander An, who wrote on his Facebook page that God doesn't exist. And the following day, at his workplace, his fellow civil servants attacked him and beat him up. And the police then came and, instead of arresting the people who had beaten him up, arrested him, and he was charged with blasphemy. There's another case, a guy called Hamza Kashgari, who's a Saudi poet, who was charged with blasphemy after writing some tweets on Twitter to the effect that if he met Muhammad, he would shake his hand as an equal. He was told in no uncertain terms that he was under threat of being arrested. He tried to flee the country. He got extradited back and has been put under pressure. He's a Muslim. He's been put under pressure to recant that apostasy. We've had Pakistan just recently closing down Twitter for a few days after the Draw Mohammed Day thing came up again. It's really one of the key battlegrounds really at the moment is the internet. It's one of the key places where this battle of freedom of expression versus censorship of conscientiously expressed views is being played out. It actually reminds me of in the mid-1990s when the internet was just catching on, and at least the World Wide Web was. I remember an Irish politician in County Cork was quoted as saying, "The internet must be stopped." So he's probably not going to get away with that, but there is still quite a battle going on at an internet level. And I think it's quite significant, and it's something that we can all play a part in terms of advancing the rights of freedom of expression. Particularly like the last one in terms of Pakistan. Like Pakistan is just an appalling place in terms of blasphemy laws. I mean, we've had 2 politicians killed there in recent years. The governor of Punjab and the Minister for Minorities. One of them killed by one of his own bodyguards. And Pakistan, again, annoyingly, absolutely infuriatingly, when Ireland passed its blasphemy law a couple of years ago, Pakistan started citing the wording of it at the United Nations as best practice for blasphemy laws internationally, and you kind of know you're doing something wrong when you start getting cited by Pakistan as best practice for blasphemy laws. There's another case at the moment in Kuwait. Again, somebody accused of insulting Muhammad and the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain on Twitter. And whether it's coincidental or not, frighteningly, just this week, we're in the middle of a process where the Kuwaiti government are passing a law increasing the penalty for blasphemy from imprisonment to death. So, you know, this whole battle is being played out very, very seriously and very, very fundamentally as we speak. Again, look again, by the way, at that particular crime, which is insulting Muhammad and the rulers of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. And it gets to the heart of what blasphemy charges are used for in all cases, really. I mean, going back to the book of Exodus, when you were told not to revile God or the leaders of your tribe, is that blasphemy laws are used not to protect theology. They're used to prop up political positions, and they're used to suppress opposition and to suppress free thinking. And particularly in Islamic countries, they are poorly defined laws. There's very poor due process. Even an allegation of blasphemy against you can be enough to either have you jailed until such time as you repent whatever it is you're supposed to have done, or to have a violent mob attack you, your house, and or your family. So just being accused of blasphemy in those states is enough of a problem without having any form of due process. The next thing I want to touch on is the overlap between blasphemy and apostasy laws in Islamic states, and at how they affect Western democracies. And the ones we'd be most familiar with, obviously, are the Danish cartoons. Maybe going back as far as the Salman Rushdie thing would be the thing that would be the incident most people would probably feel that this recent spate of fatwas and attempts to influence things outside Islamic states began. But it's not. It's actually gone back. It's gone back further than that. There's an incident which I find fascinating, which is that in 1902, in New York, there was a new courthouse building being built in Madison Square. And as part of it, on the roof, on the balustrade on the roof, they had a series of statues, some of which represented abstract things like wisdom and justice and the seasons, and some of which represented individuals who had been part of the history of lawmaking, from Hammurabi to Muhammad, Moses, King Alfred the Great, Confucius, a whole series of statues representing different traditions in the history of lawmaking. And in 1955, when the building was being renovated, and as part of it they were renovating the statues, and the story was in the media, and suddenly a whole load of Muslims realised that there had been a statue of Muhammad for 50 years on top of this building. And the governments of Pakistan and Indonesia and Egypt complained about it and said they didn't want this statue renovated, they wanted it removed. And the Americans removed it and just left it there with a blank plinth, an empty plinth, alongside all of the other statues. So it's going back as far as the 1950s that Western states have been placating this type of oversensitive expressions of being offended. There was another case in the 1970s when the New York Times published an article about Islam, and they illustrated it with a reproduction of a Persian miniature painting of Gabriel appearing to Muhammad. And again, there were complaints about that, and 2 days later, the New York Times published an apology for offending any Muslims about that. In 1977, a group of Islamist extremists took over some buildings and took hostages and murdered one person and shot others in Washington for a number of demands, one of which was to have a film banned about the life of Muhammad made by a Muslim, which didn't even include any images of Muhammad. They had done it on the basis of showing the film through the eyes of Muhammad or through those of his relatives. So he didn't even appear on screen, but they insisted that it be removed, and it was removed from a lot of cinemas in America. In one, on its opening screening, it was closed down mid-viewing. As Muhammad was on his way from Mecca to Medina, the screen went blank and people were told that they had to get out of the cinema. So it's been going on back that far. Late 1990s, Nike brought out a shoe with a swirl logo that was meant to represent fire, and several Muslims decided that it looked too much like the symbol of Allah, and so Nike removed it. A couple of years later, Burger King, that bastion of Islamophobia, brought out an ice cream package with a swirl on it. Again, it was deemed to be too like the symbol of Allah, and Burger King surrendered their ice cream swirl. So that kind of nonsense has been going on for decades. It's not a recent thing, although what has been more significant recently is the level of violence that has been accompanying these attempts to have Western society change to suit their sensibilities. The Danish cartoons, with their carefully orchestrated, spontaneous demonstrations of outrage, where suddenly everybody all around the Muslim world went back to their inexhaustible collection of Danish flags at home and brought them out to burn. And then there was the case of the Swedish cartoonist a couple of years later that drew a cartoon of Muhammad's head on a dog's body. And if you don't remember the riots and outrage about that, it's because they didn't happen. And it shows again just how orchestrated and selective it is. It's not spontaneous outrage, it's politically organised pressure by Islamic governments and Islamic extremist groups. You also, the other more recent incident where the Pope quoted an ancient Byzantine emperor as saying that Muhammad had brought only things that were evil of anything new that he had brought. And again, despite multiple apologies or attempts to apologise by the Pope, there were riots on that one, including an Italian nun being murdered in Iraq. And again, just as an aside, given that we're talking about the Pope and the Vatican have in recent years taken to prefacing every reference to atheists or secularists with the word aggressive, and have recently started saying that atheists are not fully human. The most senior person to articulate that is Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor on the BBC a few years ago. But the significant thing about that is we don't react by threatening to burn down the Vatican. We're quite happy to let people say stupid things and argue rationally against them. And it's what's most significant about these Islamic responses to things that they disagree with, is that they're always accompanied by the threat of violence. And that's why people back down. It's not because of any great intellectual coherence in what the Islamists are saying. It's because it's accompanied by the if you take the Wild West analogy of the final rule of poker, which is that a Smith & Wesson revolver beats 4 aces, and that's really how it happens. People back down and businesses back down not because they agree with them, but because they're afraid of them. I'm going to briefly talk about how things are working in the opposite direction, because there are some positive signs where Western democracies have been having some influence, particularly in trying to rescue individual people who have been, high-profile people who have been arrested on blasphemy charges in Islamic countries. And particularly in recent times in Afghanistan, where the new constitution that was put in with American assistance has unfortunately got parts in it that allow people to be tried by Islamic law, including death penalties for apostasy and blasphemy. And there have been a couple of cases, one in which they got a pardon for somebody that had been arrested on one of those charges, and he got out of the country, was to Italy. But as well as that, there's been a constant battle going on for the last over a decade at the United Nations, where the Islamic states have been trying to get international rules combating what they call defamation of religion. Really what they're talking about is defamation of Islam. And they started off with defamation of Islam and had just changed it for political purposes to defamation of religion. And they have been getting those motions passed. They're non-binding resolutions, but they've been getting those motions passed every year since the late 1990s. Up to last year, for the first time last year, there was enough pressure for them to realise that they weren't going to get away with it, and they didn't put the motion forward that time, but instead they negotiated a resolution that reframes what they're trying to do in terms of hatred of religion and hate speech laws, which is what they're now trying to have outlawed. But it's not hate laws in the context of, let's say, if you take in America, where there are hate laws or hate crimes, but they're an existing crime that is accompanied by a hate motive. But they don't just have crimes in terms of expressing hatred. And the Venice Commission, which is a body that advises states on constitutional issues, in 2008 in a report that they made on the balance between freedom of expression and freedom of religion, have said that there should be no more blasphemy laws. Blasphemy laws should be repealed where they exist. They shouldn't be reintroduced, and that these issues should be dealt with through incitement to hatred laws, including incitement to religious hatred. Now, I think what's important if governments are going down that road is that there should be a clear distinction between hatred of people on the basis of their religion, which I think is wrong, and hatred of religion itself, which I think is quite acceptable. The idea of protecting ideas as opposed to protecting individuals is where I think we have to draw the line. Thank you very much.
So I have a question. So thank you for the presentation. Now I'm actually a little bit disappointed by your presentation, because you told us if we do blasphemy, we are with some right-wing people, and you told us that we really should be scared if we do blasphemy. And so I really miss the fun part of blasphemy, and in this presentation. And this goes in this direction. So in the internet, there's a campaign of some people like Thunderfoot who say we have to do more blasphemy so that the religious people get used to it. And what do you think about this?
I didn't say we should be scared. I said people are scared. I don't think we should be scared. Atheist Ireland has a campaign against the Irish blasphemy law, and because it is simultaneously, as I say, a silly law as well as a dangerous law, as well as our political campaigning, one of the things that we did to ridicule it was the Justice Minister who introduced the law was a man called Dermot Ahern. So we formed a new religion called the Church of Dermatology to worship Dermot Ahern. And our beliefs were, there's a Facebook page where you can become a member of the Church of Dermatology on Facebook. Our core beliefs are that Dermot Ahern created the world out of nothing, that ice cream wafers are literally the body of Dermot Ahern, and like the Mormons, we have magic underwear. We also have the Scientologists have a membership test, a personality test to determine whether you can become a member of the Scientologists. The Church of Dermatology has a similar test, except we only have 2 questions. The first question is, have you money? The second question is, are you vulnerable? And if you get both of those right, you're in. So that's hopefully an answer to your question.
My question is about the UN. I don't know exactly which is which, but there are 2 UN human rights things. The one is the Council and the other one I don't know. But I read half a year ago, it was very unspectacular, not really in the media, that I don't know which is which, but the expert gremium said that blasphemy laws are not legal for countries who signed the UN Human Rights Charter or Convention. Have you heard about that, and can you elaborate what effect this will have on Europe, for example, on the blasphemy laws in Ireland?
There are several monitoring bodies internationally for laws including blasphemy. There's the United Nations, the Council of Europe, and the European Community, each of which have their own legislative bodies and or monitoring bodies for treaties that states have signed up to. The most recent legal position internationally on blasphemy laws is not that they are unconstitutional. It is that the test is that they are provoking imminent public disorder or violence. Countries are allowed to have a blasphemy law if that is the threshold. There's been nothing specific in terms of how far, exactly how you define that threshold or not, but that is the only threshold that has been defined in a particular case. The Venice Commission report is the most recent comprehensive attempt to balance the rights of freedom of expression and freedom of religion. And its recommendations, as I said earlier, are that there should be no blasphemy laws, but that there can be incitement to hatred laws that can include incitement to religious hatred.
Gunnar, can I ask you a question? John Pearson from Atheist Ireland. I think you were saying it was section 166 of a German code.
Yes.
Now, the first question is, was that a civil code or a criminal offence?
It's a criminal.
That's dreadful. The next question is, was that all 3,000, 4,000 gods or just one of them?
Yes. So wie das Gesetz formuliert ist, betrifft es alle Götter. Aber in der Realität war es bis vor ganz wenigen Jahren, also bis vor 3 oder 4 oder 5 Jahren so, dass ausschließlich die beiden großen Kirchen davon profitiert haben. Es gab in den 80er und 90er Jahren eine ganze Reihe von Versuchen von säkularen Verbänden, als Kirchenvertreter übelste Beschimpfungen, also zum Beispiel die Formulierung, dass Atheisten keine Menschen seien, oder dass die Atheisten auf dem auf dem Niveau, moralisch auf dem Niveau unterhalb von Tieren lägen. Das war so eine Formulierung. Und da gab es dann Versuche von säkularer Seite dagegen mit dem Paragraph vorzugehen und oh Wunder, er wurde natürlich nicht angewandt. Also das heißt, im Gesetz ist es so formuliert, dass eigentlich jeder Glaube, nicht nur Glaubensrichtung, auch Weltanschauungsrichtungen davon geschützt ist. In der Praxis war es tatsächlich bis vor ganz kurzem so, dass ausschließlich die christliche Religion davon geschützt wurde.
Just finally, in the Irish Constitution, there is a requirement to have an anti-blasphemy law. Yeah. So that is why a new blasphemy law was brought in 2010. Does the German Constitution require an anti-blasphemy law, or did somebody just decide to throw one in there?
No, something like that doesn't exist. It's historical appendix. I showed that in the first criminal code, I'm not sure whether the word is right, from 1872, the article was formulated or was in it, and then it was never abolished since then.
You mentioned that many of these religious people don't think identity change is possible for them. So I think it's not a technicality. I think they don't think it's an option for them because so much of their life, of their future, of their safety depends on it, that they can't actually just leave it. So I would like to ask whether you have an opinion on what kind of overstructure there needs to be to make these people safe to consider identity change.
Ich denke, das kommt jeweils darauf an, wem wir da gegenüberstehen. Also ich denke, die Strategie, jemandem die Tür aufzumachen, aus dem Glauben rauszukommen, muss individuell entschieden werden. Ich gehe nicht davon aus, dass es einen Masterplan gibt, den wir anwenden können. Und eine wichtige Sache hatte ich ja am Ende meines Vortrags gesagt, es gibt gesellschaftliche Größen, die Religion, sagen wir mal, begünstigen. Wir wissen zum Beispiel, dass soziale Sicherheit dazu führt, dass sich weniger Menschen für Religion interessieren als in Zuständen sozialer Unsicherheit oder in Staaten, in denen ein Sozialsystem kaum existent ist. Das andere ist natürlich zu gucken, dass es Möglichkeiten gibt, außerhalb der, also quasi die religiöse Gemeinschaft zu verlassen und neue Angebote zu finden. Sowohl im sozialen Bereich als auch im weltanschaulichen Bereich. Es gibt Menschen, denen diese soziale Einbindung sehr wichtig ist und es gibt ja auch Organisationen, die das anbieten. Ist nicht mein Ding, mache ich nicht, aber andere machen das und machen das auch ganz gut. Ich denke, das wären zwei Aspekte. Und dann, um auf die Frage von vorhin nochmal einzugehen, natürlich habe ich nichts dagegen, auch freche Religionskritik zu äußern, aber ich würde immer mitdenken, welche Wirkung sie hat. Kann sie erfolgreich sein oder nicht? Ich würde sie nicht verbieten, wenn sie erfolglos ist, das ist klar, aber ich würde es anders machen, wenn ich es machen würde.
Can I just say, by the way, in terms of Islam, an obvious thing that would make people more comfortable changing from Islam is not having the threat of death for apostasy.
So I'm from the Indonesian atheist group, and you mentioned Alex Ahn case, and it's not about just about Alex Ahn. There's a lot of cases like that recently with all kinds of minority groups become victimized by the same blasphemy law, like the Ahmadis, the Shia, and the patterns is always the same. It's like some Islamic thugs come attacking some event or some victim, and the police come and protecting the victim by arresting them. And we actually, in Indonesia, we already tried to apply for judicial review against that blasphemy law, but it was rejected in the early 2010, and the judges said that the blasphemy law is needed to keep public order. So the police also often saying something equivalent to this, to saying something equivalent to saying like, I'm saving you by jailing you. They want you dead. I'm just telling you. Do you have? Can you help me in providing strong argument against that kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, what's particularly, I mean, that the Indonesian blasphemy law was challenged, as you say, a couple of years ago, and on the day that the judgment was being made, there were riot police in the streets in case the judgment went the wrong way, because there would be riots. Some of the legal team for the people trying to challenge the constitutionality were beaten up within the courthouse. And again, annoyingly enough, and this is why I keep going back to the both symbolic and real problems caused by the Irish blasphemy law, is one of the arguments that was used by legal people during that whole issue when the Indonesian blasphemy law was its constitutionality was being challenged was, well, Ireland has just passed a new blasphemy law. You know, there's nothing unusual about blasphemy laws. So yeah, it is very dangerous. To answer your question in terms of what can be done, what I think is very important is that there is solidarity between atheist and other secular and human rights groups around the world on this particular issue. Both in terms of creating high-profile support for individual cases, because if there is high-profile support, it's more likely that an individual person is going to either escape being killed or have their sentence reduced. But also to have that campaign at United Nations level, also at the OSCE this year. Very significant thing this year. Ireland is chair of the OSCE this year. And is saying that freedom of expression is one of the things that we're going to be campaigning for. So if people here have an opportunity to contact the Irish government on that issue and say, during your chairpersonship of the OSCE, take up these blasphemy cases in other countries where people are being threatened with death. Thanks.
One thing is certain, that the problem is going to be more and more serious. We have Mr. Yunus here, who's been banned in Pakistan for the same thing. But I don't think he is much marketed. So the problem is going to be serious. The state and other institutions are going to be more and more weak. So under this situation, with the knowledge that this group has, historical, in-depth, width, the spirit and the IT-led changes which are taking place. My question to all three and also to the group will be, there is need to enhance the width, the depth, the magnitude and also the height of raising questions. Questions which cannot be easily answered by the so-called fundamentalist. I come from Delhi. And I am observing, now I am 66, I am observing the change which is coming, and more fundamentalists are assuming role in the state and police. And what brother from Indonesia said, and what he had raised the question, the answer has to be around. Please think over it. Raise more and more questions. Look for people beyond atheism, those who are prepared to question, those who have a fighting ability, raising questions, and then also documenting the role of media and raising, in short, level of questioning so that the answers become difficult and we go to more and more toward truth, science, and civility in the society. Please think over it, and everybody will have to ponder on this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shadell, Mr. Nugent, both of you spoke against blasphemy laws. We all expected you to. But both of you prefaced your support for the opposition against blasphemy law with some exceptions. Mr. Nugent, you said that we should draw a line between attacking a person and attacking an idea. Mr. Shadell, you might have said, and I say might because my grasp on German is about as tenuous as the extremists' grasp on reason. I think that you said that we should be allowed to speak against religion in any way insofar as we help emancipate an individual. And some might say, if these principles are enshrined in law, that in some cases, an attack on idea actually attacks an individual because the idea is so intertwined with the individual that he is attacked by an attack on an idea. And similarly, that, say, drawing Muhammad on Draw Muhammad Day doesn't actually help emancipate anyone. So in that case, it only serves to attack those people who take this idea way too seriously. And I think that those ideas are tenuous, but I'd ask you if you could please provide perhaps a stronger position, because these ideas, if enshrined in law, might still be open to an attack. Thank you.
Okay, well, on the identity issue, I simply don't accept that because somebody believes an idea is so fundamental to their personal identity, that an attack on that idea is an attack on them. I think you can distinguish between things like race and gender that are just biological things that happen and that you don't have control over, and ideas, which people can and do change ideas, and if people are going to retreat into this is so fundamental, this idea is so fundamental to my belief that I'm offended by it, well, fine, you can be offended, but don't expect people to be to be legally prevented from saying things that cause that level of offence to you. I think that distinction is reasonably clear to me.
Okay, ich will dann zunächst mal eines klarstellen. Ich gehe natürlich nicht davon aus, dass Religionskritik, auch die Religionskritik, die ich jetzt für nicht unterstützenswert ansehe, verboten werden soll. Das ist keine Frage der juristischen Ebene, da bin ich ja in der Anti-166-Szene seit über 20 Jahren aktiv. Also diese Paragraphen sollen abgeschafft werden. Über was ich gesprochen habe, war eine Frage unserer strategischen Ausrichtung, was wir tun sollten. Das heißt nicht, dass ich dafür bin, das andere zu verbieten. Das war keine juristische, sondern eine politische Aussage. Das ist das Erste. Und das Zweite, ich sehe Religionskritik als Kommunikation an. Natürlich wird jemand wie Ayatollah Khomeini oder irgendwelche Opus Dei-Oberen sich über jede Form von Kritik aufregen. Das sind aber auch Leute, die für emanzipatorische Schritte weitestgehend verloren sind, oder zumindest im statistischen Mittel. Es wird den einen oder anderen geben, der auch aus dieser Szene sich mal emanzipiert, aber im statistischen Mittel wird dort keine Emanzipation stattfinden. Das heißt, das sind nicht die Leute, die ich mit Religionskritik anspreche. Ne, es ist mir egal, was die darüber denken, die können sich ruhig aufregen. Bei dieser Überlegung, die ich angestellt habe, ging es mir um die Menschen, die Religionskritik sehen und möglicherweise aufnehmen. Ne? Und das ist da in dem Moment meine Zielgruppe und für die muss es passen.
One of the points that was made earlier on, I think, was about solidarity with other groups beyond atheism, and I think that's correct. I think that's important. I think particularly in Islamic countries, a lot of Christians are persecuted, and a lot of people from other minority religions, Baha'is and others, and in any Islamic state, members of whatever the minority Muslim sect within that state can be discriminated against with blasphemy laws. Now, so I do think on this issue, I think it is important enough that we should be building alliances with people from other religions. I would be happier if there was a sense of reciprocity, and we also got some solidarity from the Christian religion on things like, gay rights and women's rights, but I wouldn't be holding my breath waiting for that.